When my car was stolen, I thought the police would help, but they ignored me. So I became my own detective, chasing clues, following leads, and uncovering a shocking truth about who took my car and why. The day my car was stolen didn't feel like the kind of day where everything could fall apart. The sun was bright, the streets were buzzing, and I was running late for work. I'd parked outside my apartment building the night before. Nothing unusual about it. My little silver sedan wasn't flashy, but it was mine. I had worked extra shifts, sacrificed weekends, skipped nights out with friends, all to afford that car. It represented independence, freedom, and honestly, survival. Without it, I couldn't get to work, couldn't run errands, couldn't visit my mom who lived across town. That car wasn't just metal and wheels, it was my life. That morning, when I stepped outside, coffee in one hand and bag in the other, the space where my car should have been was empty. At first, my mind refused to believe it. I blinked, looked again, and even walked to the edge of the street like maybe I'd misremembered where I parked. But the space was still empty, as though the earth had swallowed it whole. My stomach dropped. I felt dizzy, almost weightless, like I'd been shoved off a cliff. I called the police immediately, hands trembling, voice cracking as I explained what had happened. They promised to send someone over. Hours passed. Nobody came. When I called again, the dispatcher sounded bored, like I was inconveniencing her. She told me to just file a report online and wait. Wait? For what? For someone else to find my car abandoned in a ditch? For the thieves to strip it for parts? By the third call, I was angry. I begged them, told them this wasn't just a car, that I couldn't afford to lose it. The officer on the line sighed and said, "Ma'am, car theft is common. Chances are slim we'll recover it. Just file the report." That was it. No urgency, no compassion, just statistics and indifference. I felt invisible, dismissed, like my pain didn't matter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, trying to think like a detective. Who would steal my car? Why? Did they know me? Was it random? My mind raced with questions, none of which the police cared to answer. By morning, I had made up my mind. If they weren't going to help me, I would help myself. I didn't know where to start, but I knew one thing. Nobody was going to fight for me except me. I wasn't going to let the thieves win. I wasn't going to let the police's apathy define my story. This wasn't just about a stolen car anymore. It was about proving that I mattered, that my voice mattered, that I wasn't powerless. And that's the day I decided I would solve this case myself. If your car was stolen and the police brushed you off, would you trust them to handle it, or would you try to solve it yourself? The first step was denial, but the second was determination. I couldn't just sit in my apartment waiting for some miracle email from the police, so I went outside and retraced everything in my head. I stood in that same empty space where my car should have been. Neighbors passed by glancing at me, but no one stopped. To them, it was just another day. To me, it was a crime scene. I crouched low, eyes scanning the ground. A few cigarette butts, a broken beer bottle, nothing unusual. Then I spotted something tiny but sharp against the curb, a thin strip of torn fabric, black with a faint red stripe. It could have been nothing, or it could have been dropped by whoever took my car. I slipped it into a plastic sandwich bag, the kind I used for lunch, and felt like a detective for the first time. Next, I knocked on doors. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly lady in apartment 3B, said she hadn't seen anything but heard an engine rev around 2 a.m. Didn't think much of it, she said, squinting through her glasses. A college kid down the hall mentioned he saw 2 men loitering near the building late that night. He thought they were just waiting for someone. Nobody else claimed to know anything. Still, it was more than the police had given me. A time frame, a description, maybe even suspects. I remembered something my dad used to say, "When in doubt, check the cameras." So I walked around the block scanning for security cameras. A laundromat across the street had one above the door, pointing toward the sidewalk. A convenience store had another at the corner. I went inside and asked if they could show me the footage. The laundromat owner, a man in his 50s with kind eyes, shook his head. "Police request only," he said. The store clerk told me the same thing. For a moment, I felt defeated. But then a thought struck me. If the police didn't care enough to ask, maybe I could persuade them myself. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and drafted an email to the detective assigned to my case. I used every ounce of professionalism I had. I listed the possible witnesses, the torn fabric, the security cameras, even the exact times when Mrs. Peterson heard that engine. I pressed send, imagining this time they'd understand. Hours passed. No reply. Frustration built inside me until it boiled over. I slammed my laptop shut, pacing the room, muttering to myself, how could they ignore this? How could they ignore me? By nightfall, I had already decided. I would go back to those businesses tomorrow. If they wouldn't release footage to me, maybe I'd find another way. Because one thing was clear, this wasn't just a stolen car anymore. It was a fight for control, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. What's the most frustrating experience you've ever had with authorities ignoring you when you needed help? The next morning, I marched straight to the laundromat. I wasn't leaving without answers. The owner looked nervous when I asked again about the footage. "Ma'am, I told you yesterday," he said, scratching his neck. "It's against policy. Only law enforcement?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Law enforcement doesn't care. They're not coming. If you don't help me, nobody will." He looked torn, shifting on his feet. Then he sighed. "Fine, but only 5 minutes. I could lose my job if anyone finds out." He led me into a cramped back room with a humming computer. My pulse quickened as he clicked through the files. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen, showing the sidewalk outside at night, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. My heart thudded as headlights flared across the frame. A car pulled up. 2 figures stepped out, faces hidden by hoodies. They lingered by the curb, glancing around, whispering. At 2:07 a.m., they crossed the street and disappeared off camera in the direction of my building. "Pause," I said. He froze the frame. I leaned in, studying every detail. One of them had a distinctive limp, dragging his right foot slightly as he walked. The other carried a small backpack. "Do you recognize them?" the owner asked. I shook my head, but I memorized every movement, Every angle. I thanked him and left, my mind buzzing. At least now I knew it wasn't random. These men had planned it, but who were they? At the convenience store, I wasn't so lucky. The clerk, a teenager glued to his phone, barely looked up. Like I said, police only. He smirked when I pleaded. Look, lady, it's not my problem. I walked out, fists clenched, fury burning through me. That night I sat with my notes spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Witness statements, the fabric scrap, the limp, the backpack, the footage timestamp. Everything pointed to something bigger than just joyriders. But then the doubts crept in. What if I was chasing shadows? What if the police were right and my car was already stripped for parts in some chop shop? I buried my face in my hands, exhausted. Then my phone buzzed, an email from the detective. My heart leapt, but when I opened it, the words made me want to scream. Ms. Carter, we appreciate your effort, but please refrain from interfering in ongoing investigations. We have no reason to believe your leads will result in recovery. Your case remains open. Regards, Detective Holloway. Ongoing investigations? They hadn't even lifted a finger. That was the moment I stopped expecting anyone else to save me. I pushed my notes aside and stared out the window at the dark city streets. Somewhere out there were the men who had stolen my car. And if nobody else was going to find them, then I would. Even if it meant risking everything. Would you take matters into your own hands like I did, or wait and trust the authorities to handle it? The city at night has a different heartbeat. The daytime rush of cars and chatter is replaced by shadows, whispers, and the occasional growl of an engine in the distance. That night, I put on my sneakers, pulled a hoodie over my head, and walked the same route I saw in the laundromat footage. If those men had come from somewhere, maybe I could trace their path. The street was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. I scanned every corner, every alley, every flicker of light from apartment windows. When I reached the block where the footage cut off, I slowed down. Across the street, a dim alley stretched behind the convenience store. I stepped in carefully, the smell of old trash and gasoline filling my nose. Halfway down, my eyes caught something, a torn piece of black plastic, the kind used to cover steering columns. I picked it up with trembling fingers. My heart pounded. This wasn't random. This was a piece of my car. Adrenaline surged through me. I snapped a photo on my phone, then pocketed the fragment like evidence. Whoever dumped it here hadn't gone far. I pushed deeper into the alley, ears straining for sounds. At the far end, a faint light glowed from behind a garage door. I crept closer, crouching near a stack of crates. Voices floated out, muffled but sharp. Two men, arguing. Too risky, man, one said. Relax, the other replied. Nobody's looking. Cops don't care about this neighborhood. I froze, breath caught in my throat, the limp. The voice matched the rhythm of the man who dragged his foot on the footage. Through a crack in the garage door, I glimpsed a shadow moving, then a glint of silver. My car. My heart nearly stopped. It was right there, not 20 feet from me, hidden in plain sight. I wanted to burst in, scream, demand they give it back, but reality held me down. There were two of them, maybe more inside. I had no weapon, no backup, no plan. If they saw me, I'd be in danger. I forced myself to back away slowly, each step a battle against the instinct to run. When I finally reached the main street, I exhaled so hard my chest ached. For the first time, I had proof. My car wasn't gone. It wasn't stripped or sold. It was here, in this garage, guarded by thieves who thought nobody cared enough to find it. The police should have been the ones to handle this, but I already knew how that would go. They'd call it insufficient evidence, tell me to stay out of it, and my car would disappear before they even filed the paperwork. Number. If I wanted my car back, I'd have to figure out a way to get it myself. If you were in my shoes, standing outside that garage and seeing your stolen car inside, what's the first move you would make? The image of my car behind that garage door haunted me all night. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing the silver glint of its body, the way it looked trapped, caged, like me. I tossed and turned, weighing options. Do I storm in and take it? Call the police again, knowing they'll dismiss me? Wait and risk the thieves moving it somewhere else? By sunrise, my mind was clear. If I wanted my car back, I needed a plan, not just raw emotion. I brewed the strongest coffee I could and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing out scenarios like I was preparing for battle. Option 1, break in myself. Too dangerous. I had no idea how many men were inside, what weapons they might have, or whether they'd recognize me later. Option 2, tip the police anonymously. But if they botched it, the thieves would know someone had reported them, and they'd vanish with my car. Option 3, watch, wait, gather more evidence, and strike at the right time. The third option felt right, though it terrified me. It meant I had to shadow them, learn their schedule, study their habits. It meant becoming someone I never imagined I'd be, a stalker of criminals. That evening, I returned to the alley. This time I stayed across the street, hidden behind a row of dumpsters. Hours passed. At 10:15 p.m., the garage door creaked open. The limping man emerged, carrying the same backpack I had seen in the footage. Another man followed, taller, wearing a baseball cap. They lit cigarettes and argued about money before splitting up, one heading toward the corner store, the other disappearing down the street. My pulse raced as I tailed the man with the limp. I kept a block behind, blending with the shadows, pretending to scroll on my phone whenever he looked around. He stopped at a shabby apartment building, glanced over his shoulder, and slipped inside. I waited, memorizing the address. Apartment 4C, I guessed, based on the mailbox labels. Then I turned back, heart hammering. It was risky, but it was progress. Back home, I searched online for reports of car theft in my neighborhood. Buried in the local crime blotter, I found a pattern. Multiple thefts reported within a 2-mile radius, all dismissed as low priority. The dates lined up with what I was seeing. These weren't random thieves. This was organized. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. A small part of me wanted to quit, to hand everything to the police one last time and wash my hands of it. But the bigger part of me knew they wouldn't care, not until it was too late. So I made a decision. Tomorrow night, I would go back to that garage. Not to steal my car outright, but to gather the proof I needed. Photos, videos, enough evidence to force the police to act. Or, if they still refused, to give me the courage to take it back myself. Do you think ordinary people can sometimes solve crimes better than the police? Or is it always too risky to try? I learned quickly that tales require patience and nerves. I moved through the city like a quiet shape slipping between lights and parked cars. The limping man left his building with his backpack low on his shoulder and walked with the slow, careful steps of someone used to watching over his own back. I kept a distance of 3 blocks and let him lead me through routes that emptied at night. He stopped at a diner and drank coffee alone, then kept going. I never closed the gap yet. I never let him know I followed. Later, he took me to an unmarked warehouse, a place of corrugated metal and rust with a single broken pane of glass. 2 other men greeted him, and they moved like a small crew. Under a tarp, I saw a car half hidden and my breath hitched. The shape was my car, its contours familiar even under dust. Nearby, a man worked a wrench with practiced hands like he knew every bolt. This was a chop shop, not teenagers in a stolen ride. My skin prickled with cold. I crept closer, staying out of sight, and recorded what I could on my phone. Voices carried orders and jokes in the way of men who work the same dangerous rhythm. I noticed the limping man favored his right foot and that the tallest one used a cast on his left wrist. Details stacked in my head and became clues. When a delivery van rolled up, my heart hit my ribs. I froze behind a stack of pallets until the van left. A dog wandered by, then a shadow moved at the gate, then nothing. I kept filming because proof mattered more than pride. The taller man left carrying a toolbox and crossed the street to a pawn shop. I followed at a careful distance and watched him speak with the owner through a grimy window. He left with a brown paper bag. They were moving parts through local fences. They were bold because they felt safe. By dawn, I walked home exhausted and wired with adrenaline. I'd taken risky steps and collected footage and observations. I had names in my notes and a map of their routes. I'd also invited danger into my life. Yet with every fact, I felt less like a victim and more like someone who could fight back. I pictured my car there under the tarp and imagined how I would get it back. I could not stop thinking about how small things like a limp, a backpack, a toolbox could become the chain that would lead me to them. I would follow that chain until it gave me what I needed to reclaim what was mine. I promised I would not act recklessly nor be passive. I would set traps, gather witnesses, and when the moment came, take calculated steps to bring my car back and teach them stealing from me would be their mistake. I could not fail. What would you risk to get back something important that was taken from you? I needed help, but not the police, so I called Cass, my coworker, who loved danger and owned a camera. She came that night wearing a long coat and a determined grin. Together, we planned a trap. We would pretend to be buyers for car parts and lure the taller man from the pawn shop into meeting us. If he showed his face, we could learn his name and where the chop shop moved goods. We parked 2 blocks away and walked in. The pawn shop smelled of coins. The taller man emerged from the back wiping grease on a rag. Up close, he looked smaller, his eyes quick and nervous. I used a fake name and Cass backed me as a friend, lending money. We spoke about a Honda Civic. The man signaled the owner and detailed parts he had. My heart kicked, but my voice stayed calm. They agreed to meet outside in 30 minutes. We left and waited on a bench while Cass reviewed footage she took. It showed the taller man counting bills and whispering with an anxious limp man who had a bandaged wrist. We had faces and a pattern. I felt lighter and terrified. At the meeting, I trailed them at a distance. They stopped to hand over a wrapped package. After they left, I crept to the spot and found a scrap of paper beneath a cigarette butt. It had a phone number and a 2-letter code. I photographed it and pocketed the scrap. Back home, I spread everything on my table. The footage, the scrap, the partial names. I searched the number online and found a burner tied to a name matching the partial we heard. It was small proof. I called Cass, and we planned to follow the number text and trace responses. Doing nothing felt worse. That night, I sent a vague text pretending to be a buyer. The response came fast, asking where and when. I played it slow and arranged a meeting near a busy cafe. Cass insisted on coming and suggested I hide a recorder in my jacket and a second camera for distance shots. We arrived early and sat sipping coffee. The man showed up alone, eyes tired. He met a contact, then handed over a wrapped envelope with metallic clinks inside. I recorded everything. After they left, I retrieved the envelope wrapper and found a faint stamp from a local garage and a partial license plate. The pieces fit together better than before. I felt a fierce hope rising. I mapped the garage location using the stamp clues called local mechanics and checked online directories. My hands shook as I pinned photos to the wall and connected lines with a thread like some cheap detective novel. I promised myself I would not rush in alone. I would gather witnesses' footage and public attention to force action. For the first time, I believed I could find the garage in my car now. What would you risk to get back something important that was taken from you? I decided to widen the circle of light. Alone, I had clues but no authority. With Cass and a handful of neighbors and 2 online groups that cared about stolen cars, we could make noise. I posted a clear still from the laundromat footage, the torn fabric, the garage hint, and a calm, urgent plea for information. I did not call the police. I chose a public approach to force their hand. Within an hour, messages arrived. A woman recognized the limping man from a bus route. A mechanic sent a photo of the garage stamp and circled a name. A neighbor offered to stand by as witness if things went sideways. The thread swelled with supportive strangers and worried locals. Comments urged caution. Some suggested press involvement. Others asked for more evidence. Each message reshaped the plan. We set a week for the operation. Over days, we gathered proof. Cass filmed from safe distances and edited clips that told a story without exposing identities. I matched license plate fragments to a pattern used by a known fence. We traced burner numbers to a payphone and a rental van seen near the warehouse. A retired cop in the group guided me on how to document chain of custody for photos and videos so officials could not dismiss them. When the day came, we moved like a small brigade. Two neighbors stayed in cars nearby to block exits if needed. Cass and I sat in a cafe with cameras on the table. A local reporter who had followed the thread agreed to meet. The goal was not to arrest anyone ourselves, but to catch the thieves in the act and provide live witness material to force police action. We watched the warehouse through binoculars and held our breath. Trucks rolled in and out for hours, then two men emerged carrying a tarp and loaded it into a van. The limping man checked the street and nodded at the taller one. They closed the van and drove off. Our neighbor followed at a distance and recorded the plate. The reporter called the station and asked for an emergency brief. Within 90 minutes, the story ran on local news with our footage. The police called that night. Their tone different than before. They asked for all our evidence and promised to coordinate a raid. For the first time, the machinery of authority moved with speed. My phone buzzed with congratulations, fear, and warnings. I felt vindicated and terrified because getting their attention was only the beginning. I spent the night assembling digital folders, printing screenshots, and labeling timestamps. I rehearsed an account for reporters noting facts, not melodrama. Cass slept on my couch, ready to drive if needed. We agreed no vigilante violence, only surveillance and witnesses. At dawn, I watched news alerts and prepared for officers to arrive with uniforms and search warrants, hoping the raid would find my car and the chain would end. Finally, would you have used public pressure and social media to force action, or would you have kept the investigation private and low-key? Dawn smelled like wet asphalt and adrenaline. The street felt different when officers moved through it with purpose. Their boots made a cadence that steadied my stomach. Cass and I sat in the car with the reporter and two neighbors watching as squad cars rolled up. For once, I saw uniforms move like a single machine, and my panic softened into something like hope. Detectives knocked, then used a battering ram. The warehouse door buckled and splintered. Men scrambled inside. Commands echoed sharp and exact. The limping man stumbled toward the light and froze when an officer cuffed him. The taller man tried to shove a box, then tripped over a crate. They looked at me as they were led past ropes of police tape. I kept my face steady, though my insides were a storm. Inside the warehouse, the air tasted of oil and stale smoke. My car crouched under a tarp at the back, dented and filthy but whole. Evidence techs moved with quiet method. Cameras flashed as they photographed my license plate, the stripped parts, the racks of radios with numbers filed off. They cataloged airbags, tires, plates stacked like shame. I wanted to run to my car and touch it, but an officer gently held me back. "We'll get it ready," she said. Her voice had a firmness that felt like shelter. Detective Holloway approached, cradling a folder. His eyes met mine, and for a second I read surprise, then something like regret. "Miss Carter," he said, words careful, "you did good work. We underestimated this ring." He took my footage and notes and promised to pursue the larger network. The apology landed awkward and small, but necessary all the same. I handed over every scrap I had gathered, the torn fabric, the pawn shop clip, the burner messages. He listened, nodded, and finally I believed him. The men were processed and led away beneath the morning's hum. The taller man glared with a raw shame. The limping man kept his head bowed. Later I learned they were part of a string of thefts tied to a fence across town. Police said arrests would continue. They offered me documents to sign and forms that would start insurance and legal processes. That afternoon I sat in my car while an officer checked the engine. It coughed, then idled. It smelled of smoke and oil and the dust of other lives, but it was mine. I ran my hand along the wheel and felt a fierce relief settle. The city outside kept its busy, indifferent rhythm, but inside the car I felt a private victory. I knew the road ahead would include repair bills, calls, and court dates. I knew justice could be messy, but I drove home with windows rolled up and a soft smile because I had been the author of my rescue, and that truth would not let me forget the power I had reclaimed. Would you have handed everything to the police earlier, or kept pushing like I did until they finally acted? Weeks after the raid, police interviews came. The case thickened. Detectives followed our footage and neighbors' tips. Arrests followed and plea deals were offered. Court dates filled my calendar, and waiting rooms felt oddly empty despite results. In a hearing, the taller man said they stole to pay debts. The judge listened. I felt anger and a flicker of uneasy understanding. Justice proved messy sentences, probation, community service, balanced against context. My car needed repairs. Insurance covered some costs, but not dents or the smell. Cass helped repaint, and we drove to the coast with the windows down, laughing until we were hoarse. It felt like a reclamation ritual. Holloway visited once more. "We're closing this ring, but there's more work," he said. He thanked me and said protocols would change. I believed him partly because I had watched their response shift. Systems moved slowly, though. Media attention faded. People returned to routine. Neighbors waved when I walked my dog. Cass landed freelance work. The retired cop's note became a reference. Small ripples spread outward. Months later, I stood where my car had been. A different vehicle parked there. I fingered the fabric scrap in a jar on my shelf like a talisman. The world was not fixed. Police had blind spots. Thieves found workarounds. I had learned the edges of my strength. My lesson was not that institutions always fail, but that people matter. Voices can be nuisance or force. I chose force tempered by care. I risked, planned, and asked for help. I changed the outcome and a little of the neighborhood. I drove past my old building and felt the weight of what I had done. The wheel fit my hands like a promise. I had been ignored until I would not be. Stubbornness became my ally. Being seen sometimes means standing in the light and refusing to step back. I kept a small ritual. Each week I checked the jar and added one small note, a date, a name, a face that had helped. It became a record of the people who refused quiet apathy. I wrote down the laundromat owner who risked his job, the neighbor who followed the van, the retired cop who taught me chain of custody, and Cass who lent courage. The notes were messy but true. In time I spoke to community groups about vigilance and mutual aid. I did not preach. I told a story of careful steps, documenting evidence, calling neighbors, using social media to make noise, and how small acts can force institutions to move. People came with stories, nodded, sometimes cried. Changing a system felt impossible, but changing expectations felt possible. My car bore scars. Each dent reminded me of nights I refused to be quiet. The city kept its indifferent rhythm, but my corner felt altered. I drove to my mother's on Sundays. Life bent back toward ordinary things. After hearing the whole story, what would you do differently if your car was stolen and officials ignored you?